Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon to some of you, and thank you for joining us today again. We're looking forward to a good session on the nitty-gritty of the book production today. I'm sure we had a very good time yesterday, a very provocative lecture from Professor Tade Aino and the colleagues, Dr. Iwilade and Dr. Cassandra. So at this point, I'll be handing you over to Dr. Abisoye Election to give us a recap of yesterday and to tell us what today's program will be like. Over to you, Dr. Election.
Thank you very much, Prof. Good morning, everyone. Let me thank you again for finding it expedient to be available this morning. We started well yesterday with lectures from a very scintillating lecture from Professor Tade Aino. Also a follow-up from Dr. Iwilade. So let me stop that. So I think I'm okay now.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so as we said yesterday, we started this project last year with a workshop, the institutional workshop on the context and concept of African development, and we had a very good outing. So what I will just do now is to share some of the findings that we achieved last year with us, at least from then till now, so that we can know what we have done so far. So please permit me to share the screen, my screen. All right. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we see the screen.
All right, thank you. Okay, so how can we reimagine African development? So as I said, we started last year. We invited speakers from all over Africa to speak on their perception and conception of African development. So the combined activities of the 2021 study revealed following 5 key learnings. Number 1, defining African development requires contextualization. Number 2, Africa's development trajectories need to be decolonized. Number 3, African development requires an urgent cultural renaissance. Number 4, Africa's development should be an inclusive process. And number 5, African development requires extensive governance reforms. So these were the 5 points that we were able to bring out from the workshop last year. And all these were explicit enough in the book titled The Little Book of African Development. This is the link. You can follow this link on IT will paste the link on in the chat room so that you can follow the link and go through it for your consumption. So we also identified some gaps. Number 1, we discovered that limited scholarly interrogations of the publicly determined context and aspirations of African development, because we discovered that we have not had enough scholarly interrogations looking at the context and aspirations of African development as we were seeing it at that time. Also, we discovered that academic writing largely focuses on diagnosing and analyzing the challenges of African development without directly envisioning or reimagining preferred futures that center the interests and agency of Africa and our people. This just goes to say that some of these scholarly articles were not looking inward enough, considering what the African people really want, not just looking at the universal benchmarks as it is with organizations, international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, but then we needed to look inward and look at what the African people really crave for. All right, so from conceptualization or contextualization development in Africa, the people's view, to what we are doing now, reimagining concept and context of African development. So, you know, this is a book project. One of our, in fact, our major deliverable in this work is the book project that we are working on, that all of you have submitted wonderful abstracts to. So through the book, we'll be seeking to bridge the identified gap by curating the expert opinions and reflexive positionalities of the academic community on what can or should be a grounded understanding of the concept and context of African development. Number two, through the book, we wish to collate multidisciplinary scholarly perspectives based on theoretical and or empirical evidence that outline how Africa's future development trajectories can be sustainable, realistic, and fit for purpose. And lastly, through the book, we intend to produce an important knowledge resource for evidence-based contextualized African futures thinking, scenario building, and policy development, which will eventually be used for policymakers, international development experts, academic community, and the general public. So it's a awesome exercise that we are embarking upon, and I believe that this can be achieved through your contributions. So in all, we received 37 abstracts, and this is the spread: 23 from West Africa, 5 from East Africa, 3 from South Africa, 4 from Europe, 1 from South America, and 1 from the USA. And we categorized the abstract into 4 thematic categories. The first category is African development dynamics and the global order. The second is conceptualizing African development and African studies. And the third is culture, language, society, and the African Renaissance. And number 4 is decolonizing African development ethics and moralities. We have categorized all the abstract we got into these 4 thematic options. So, and this later on in this session, we'll be working, our reviewers will be talking on what they have discovered, what they have reflected upon on each abstract. Thank you very much. All right, so I now invite Professor Tabat Lawansi to start from our own level, speak to one of the sections that we have categorized, as I said earlier. Professor Lawansi, please.
Thank you, Dr. Leshin, and thank you, colleagues. So what we're going to be doing is just to do an overview of the different abstracts that were submitted. We're going to do it in the different sections, 4 different sessions, 5 sessions actually, looking at the different contexts that Dr. Leshin has outlined. The book has 4 thematic areas, and we'll be starting with the thematic section on African development dynamics and the global order. What I'm going to be doing now is going to give brief comments on each of the papers, and then we'll have 2 reviewers speak in general terms about the papers and the in light of the larger framing, because this volume is meant to be a solutions book, not merely another exercise in intellectual complaining, as we have seen with issues around African development. So I'll give comments on each of the chapters, and the 2 reviewers will give general comments on the various chapters as well as some points to consider. And then we'll have a short interactive session because we envisage this process to be a co-learning opportunity. So I'll just go straight on. And the first chapter is on African urbanization in the urban century, urban management and perspectives of African futures. And essentially the challenge with this chapter is that it speaks directly, it gives us a historical attempt on sustainable urban development from the time of the MDGs up until now, but it does not, it speaks very vaguely and very generically. And so we're unable to really catch a key research question or a key scope for the urban futures that are being proposed. And our response to this is that there should be specific issues around urban management, and the use of case studies will be good in order to contextualize the issues that are being discussed. And for this particular chapter on African urbanization in the urban century, there is need for the author to reflect on what should be the African development agenda. If you're giving us a solution on urban management, on urban futures, it should be linked to an overarching agenda. Yes, and then we have the second chapter on agricultural modernization and the challenge of remodeling African development, the Ujjama philosophy revisited. And the chapter is quite interesting, but it's also philosophical, and considering it speaks to an ideology that was raised from the 1960s as a potential game changer for the future. It does not include evidence of where this philosophy has been successfully operationalized. So our question is that how does the Ujjama philosophy differ from other global development dimensions, and how can it be operationalized in light of seeming opposing development paradigms across the continent? And then the other thing is Ujjama philosophy is, the proponent is Julius Nyerere. How do we juxtapose that into the agricultural sector that the author is trying to, that the author is using as an entry point? It's important that there are clear recommendations or clear analytical frameworks for us to impute the Ujjama philosophy into the 21st century agricultural dimensions for Africa. And then the third chapter is on rethinking Africa's development in the era of globalization. And for this chapter, we find that the chapter is a bit lacking in a research question and in a provocation. Like I said earlier, we are not trying to publish another book of complaints. And so this chapter would have to think from a more solutions providing perspective. The chapter started well, you know, however, it is still a complaint. Now that we know the problem, what is the solution? How do we move forward to achieve an Africa that develops at its own pace despite globalization, or an Africa that leverages, you know, the globalization dynamics for the benefit of herself? So that is the question that we have for this particular chapter. The chapter also highlighted issues around mineral extraction and trade without being specific as to the consequences or implications of these. And then also contextualizing a bit so that we are able to identify some of the impacts of globalization within specific countries so that the solutions that are being proffered will be contextualized. We then have another one on deconstructing public participation in African development, why public participation is a bottleneck. And in this chapter, we see a condemnation of development aid. And the question we have is, what is wrong with development aid and development agencies? Is it the very idea of the development aid and development agencies, or how they are implementing their programs on the continent? We then ask, why is public participation problematic? What is the origin? And how is it alien to African ideals of communal life and cooperation? We also identify that this particular paper raises a lot of questions and kind of amplifies or objectifies the Southeast Asian case study as a preferred route. And the question is, why are they considered for comparison in this case? Why are they preferred? And the author also makes a broad generalization on how public participation and good leadership do not go hand in hand. And I think that's a bit problematic. So the author will need to respond to how is public participation and good leadership mutually exclusive. I think, well, this is a personal opinion, public participation is sine qua non for the democratic participatory society, particularly a society that will move forward without tyranny. So the author will need to reflect on that, how can we move beyond these thinking that public participation and good leadership should be mutually exclusive or can be mutually exclusive. And then we have this interesting paper on 3 square meals a day and a roof over our heads, reimagining development from the perspective of urban slum dwellers in Ghana. And we find this paper quite interesting, but the paper talks about a critical disjuncture between the global development dynamics and life for ordinary Ghanaians, but it does not tell us how and what this critical disjuncture is. And so the question is, provide more nuance as to what that critical disjuncture is, and also reflect on the extent to which supranational perceptions of development inform subnational urban development policy, and how is the situation of the urban poor in Accra and Kumasi, which are the case studies, different from the rural poor in Ghana. It will be quite an interesting chapter, and we're looking forward to reading it. And then the next one is on taxation and the dynamics of development in Africa, using a case study of Gambia. And here we see the paper attempting to examine taxation and dynamics of development, with the author hypothesizing that taxation has no positive effect on development in the Gambia. And the question we ask is, what is the basis for this hypothesis, and how does this relate to the larger African development narrative? Are we pushing for a society in which taxation is, removed, minimized, reconsidered, and also the objective of the study needs to be narrowed down, to how taxation is affecting or not affecting specific societal indicators. This particular paper is relying on quantitative data methodology, and it will be interesting to see how that goes on. But it's important that clear terms are established, and the three objectives look at particular sectors so we are able to see the real value. And then there's another chapter on metaphor as urban architectural language, reflecting indigenous customs. And this looks at, I'm not sure I'm supposed to be responding to this paper. Okay, anyway, I'll just go ahead and speak to it, and then Dr. Aleshin would also speak to it in his own section. It speaks about indigenous urban templates and city development models. And the challenge that we have with this paper is essentially with regards to the methodology. A structured interview with two custodians of language culture perhaps is somewhat narrow in reaching these wide conclusions of an entire language. So perhaps there is need to be a bit more nuanced as to the methodology, as to which towns the study is focusing on, particularly because the various Yoruba towns have different dialects, and also the linkages between the SDGs, which are highlighted here, and the larger issues of the issues of metaphors and oral values, that there's need to show the linkages between this cultural context and the SDGs. And then we have this chapter on the conceptualization of African development, the theoretical perspective, which is a very long and wordy abstract, and we will prefer that the author avoids long sentences and, avoids a lot of the complex issues. What we see in this chapter is that the author is trying to do everything. There's so many issues that are being addressed as to make it too wordy and as to distract from one or two issues that will really contribute to knowledge with this chapter. So we would be advising that the author focus on one or two main issues. Currently, the author wants to look at human rights, the independent free tech press, the Western concepts of an independent and free tech press, foreign aid, triple heritage, dual economics, cultural dualism, and the idea of two-thirds society, looking at nature of relationships between competing paradigms and the new society, and search for more detailed relevance and empirical sound approaches. I think that's a lot. And so we'll be suggesting that the author focuses on one or two areas, deals with them extensively in such a way as to contribute to knowledge. And then we have this final chapter for this first session on reimagining concepts and contexts of African development. looking at it from the arts production in Mozambique. And the comment here is that the paper currently reads very descriptively, and we need to have a firm contribution to knowledge. How does these alternative cultural market in Mozambique, how does it contribute perhaps to the emancipation of Mozambican artists, perhaps to cultural renaissance in that part of the continent? And what lessons can we learn from that will help us preserve cultural heritage, market cultural heritage, or push for more for the amplification of art in public spaces? So that particular chapter needs to be reworked in such a way that we can learn from the process, and we can, reflect on the core benefits of these type of markets and how they can be used as a tool for expanding African heritage. I will pause at this moment to yield the floor to my colleague, Dr. Moses Yakubu, who will reflect generally on the 9 or so chapters that we just spoke about. And then we will welcome a few comments from the authors. Over to you, Dr. Moses.
Thanks so much, Professor Taibat Lawansin, for that review. I want to start by saying that all the abstracts submitted to a very large extent are very interesting. They are lovely abstracts. And I think, like you said, if reworked and strengthened in certain areas, it will really help in this project. A quick one, I want to take the 9 abstracts you've gone through. I want to quickly say 1 or 2 things. For the first one, African urbanization in the urban century, urban management perspective of African future. This abstract focuses on the current states of urbanization. It talks on factors and elements of urban management and how to annex such for the future. I expect to address African development agenda. The author should, in clear terms, address African development agenda or development in general. Having in mind that this project is all about Africa's development narrative, how we see development in this context. So the author of this abstract should try as much as possible to address these issues on urban management, what Africa should do to improve African development agenda should also be considered under this particular paper. The second one, agricultural modernization and the challenge of remodeling African development, the Ujjama philosophy revisited. Yes, this is one good work that I think will be a plus in this ongoing project. That notwithstanding, there is the need for the author to include evidence of the sources or sources of the Ujjama philosophy. If the author is adopting or deploying this philosophy, Ujjama, then it should, in clear terms as well, give us areas where this practice or this system had worked and how it can be deployed in the whole of Africa to achieve what the project really is out to achieve. The author should endeavor to juxtapose Ujjama with the concept of African development through agriculture. What exactly it is. So it should be able to tell us how it will use this through agriculture. The third paper this sounds quite interesting. We're talking of rethinking, quite interesting to me, but I think the author, to some extent, failed to outline the objectives. The objectives were not clearly stated. Also, the method, the methodology of the work. What are the guiding issues, guiding research questions? The author needs to really be explicit in all of these areas. One, the objective needs to be very well stated, the methodology to be deployed under this study, and questions, or we want to say research questions that would guide the writing of this paper. Also, I discovered that there is no hint on how globalization is impacting Africa's development. So I asked the author as well in his write-up to visit this area, to focus attention on this area, to tell us how globalization is impacting. Yes, we tend to know about this, but bringing this perspective, this new dimension, he should in his paper make it clear to readers or general readership. The fourth abstract here discusses deconstructing public participation in African development. Not to waste time here, the author needs to address the origin of public participation. While reading through the abstract, I kind of discovered that the author is trying to, if I'm not wrong, trying to blame public participation for the dilemma we have in Africa today. And I see that as really problematic, that if we're talking about democracy today, I think it should be active involvement, participation by all and sundry. So I think the author then needs to make proper clarification. How is public participation alien to African? The author also needs to make that very clear in his write-up, because he's talking about that public participation is alien to Africa, kind of anchoring these on Western ideas, the global north, that it is not that practice in Africa, and so it's alien. So the author needs to make clarification on this particular note. Also, it should give explanation for comparing Africa development models with Southeast Asia. Yes, I saw that in the write-up, trying to make comparison. I think at this point, we should look inward. We should be able to evolve African model in African development agenda. So the comparison is trying to make I expect the author to try as much as possible to shed more lights on that. I'll move to the fifth one, a very good paper, 3 square meals a day and a roof over our heads. Quite interesting. This is one good abstract that addresses the theme of the book project. Let me say that. The author should shed more light on the critical disjunction and epistemological breaks in the development literature in Ghana. Yes, he has given us a very good abstract, but he came up with some ideas that need more clarification. So the author should please tell us more about this disjunction and epistemological breaks between words and words in Ghana. He should be able to make a clarification on that. And we go to the next one, taxation and the dynamics of development in Africa, the Gambian perspective. the author needs to demonstrate how taxation relates to the larger African development agenda. I'm still kind of struggling with this particular paper, but I think if the editors will give more time, the author, I want to believe, will be able to do justice to this. But as it is now, the paper needs to be tweaked more, to be kind of rejigged more, strengthened in order to capture African development agenda and narrative. The seventh paper before me here is Metaphor as Urban Architectural Language, Reflecting Indigenous Custom. Really, at first glance, I wasn't too, I'm not too okay with the paper, but I think the author can still rework, can still rejig this and come out with a better write-up. The studies, to me, is not too directly, it's not directly related to the theme of the project, though it addresses the reinterpretation of language-inspired design to mirror architectural values of African. However, it failed to link such to the issue of African development. The paper is not too really in sync with the general theme of this project. So I think the author still has a lot to do in trying to redirect and refocus its abstracts to capture the theme of this project. The next, Conceptualization of African Development, a Theoretical Perspective. This is another paper I want to say is very, very good and will be a boost for this project. A very good work. However, let me quickly say this, that the author should try as much as possible to desist from long sentences. The first sentence in this abstract, I think, runs to about 5 lines. And I think that's just too long. And if one look at it critically, you discover that in a way it's somehow clumsy. So the author should try and avoid the use of long sentences. Too many concepts to be addressed. The author raised so many issues. And I think all these issues or concepts cannot be addressed in just one paper. So I will advise or suggest that the author should focus on 1 or at most 2 concepts and try as much as possible to explore this in the context of African developments. And finally, reimagining concepts and contexts of African developments. To me, again, the title does not really reflect in the work. While reading these abstracts, I started hearing about heart and what have you. I was thinking that most of the themes or issues raised in the content, in a way, should reflect in the title. But as it is, the title sounds more abstract, while the content is quite different. So content is not directly related to the title. So I think the editors of this work and the author should see how to refashion and refocus this particular title to capture the content of the work. I want to say thank you for this. I want to hand over to Professor Taibat Alawansin. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Moses. We'll just go quickly to the next session, which is on the same African development dynamics, the global order, and African urban futures. Please, you can put in comments or questions in the chat room. After we've gone through the entire session and the discussant, for this session, Dr. Peter Oni speaks, we can then have an interactive session. So I'll go quickly to the chapter on From Neoliberalism, Africa's Development Paradigm to Critical Holism, Reconfiguring. The chapter title is a bit nebulous and needs a bit of work, but the abstract reads very well. However, there is a need for a critique of the neoliberal approach. How, why, and where does critical holism address the gaps of neoliberalism? I think that's important to look at. We cannot be recommending something new without showing the gaps of what exists and how that new approach that we are recommending effectively addresses the challenges of the former. We then have this abstract on development in Nigeria, spatial implications of conflict in the North. And the abstract is quite interesting, but it's a bit wordy, and it intends to use ethnographic spatial analysis to consider the issues. That's also interesting. It's looking at issues around public space management and how the spatial implications of conflict run deep. It will be good for the paper to speak to specific theoretical and conceptual issues, and then give us empirical evidence to back those contexts. It's still somewhat descriptive. We would, given the importance of the challenge and the currency of the issues, it will be good for us to have a very forward-looking context of this chapter beyond the description of how public space is being appropriated. Are there windows of opportunity for us to turn things around towards safer public spaces? And on the same line, work towards conflict mitigation and peaceful urban futures. We then have this one on GDP, beyond GDP numbers, considering alternative measures of well-being and development, which is quite interesting, potentially groundbreaking in that it speaks directly to some of the development or measurement indicators that we have perhaps highlighted as being somewhat problematic. The question here is, what are the indicators of well-being and satisfaction? Because the author seeks to use that as a measuring index. What are the indicators and how can they be measured? We then have a bit of a problematic where the author is comparing the United States, which is a country, with Africa, which is a continent. North America is made up of the United States, Mexico, Canada. So you cannot be comparing a single country with a continent. That's not, the scale differs quite strongly. And then the author speaks about gun violence being an overwhelming challenge in the US, but neglects the fact that across Africa, there is widespread violence. Therefore, how can these be compared? The aftermath of both forms of violence are dire, and we need to kind of balance things out. And also the Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, which the author is looking at, needs to be critiqued. Does it align with African values and norms? And is this Western developed happiness model a universal ideal? And finally, do we really need an index to measure happiness on a national basis? So the author will do well to reflect on those as they seek to develop the chapter. The next one is the reality and rhetoric of adopting development agendas and frameworks in Africa. And for this chapter that looks at issues around how global development agenda are being deployed in African cities, it's largely a theoretical paper. There is a need for a key research question and also to show us through some case studies or some contextualized sentences how these issues play out in specific African urban contexts, be they cities or countries. And then we have another one on the new global order and the future of Africa, where the author is trying to analyze literature to speak about, to examine the debate on whether the rising Southern global powers reinforce North-South divide or increase diversity of alternative policies and alignments. I think it's still a bit of a mouthful. There is need for an overarching research question outlining what the issues are, what African states should do at the continental level, at the regional level, at country levels. So the paper is still quite broad, and therefore, in order to offer a real contribution to knowledge, you will have to be a bit tighter and a bit more focused on specific African states. And then we have this chapter on state building and governance, theories and models. And it speaks about how Africa's development has taken different trajectories, and the phenomenon of state building around the world with a focus on Africa. And there is need to be more specific as to what this chapter seeks to achieve, and a more specific context of the implications or consequences of the adoption of the paradigms that are listed in the abstract would be good. What, beyond understanding what the paradigms are, what can we do to respond? What can this chapter do to respond to the overarching question that the book seeks to answer? What should be Africa's development priority? In this case, focusing on governance philosophies and approaches, what should be Africa's development priority? So that's the final chapter for this session 2 on African development dynamics. I'll invite Dr. Peter Oni now to give some general reflections, and then we would have time for interaction. Over to you, Dr. Peter.
Thank you, Professor Levinson, and viewers, good morning or good afternoon or evening, wherever you find yourself. This is actually a wonderful workshop, and through the submission that I was asked to review, so many things came up, and I thought of reminding us, including myself, of the nitty-gritty of what an extra should be. Most of the things that I discover in this place issues related to the format, the way of writing an abstract. How do we present an abstract? What are the things that are, the basic elements and fundamentals of an abstract? I examined some of the titles. I discovered that some of the titles do not really speak to the summary, or some title are not catchy enough. They are not representative enough of the idea of the author. Now, some of them are too long as abstract. What actually do we define or understand as an abstract? An abstract is actually a summary of a larger work, of what you're going to develop in the content, in the paper that you have to submit for whatever research work that you're going to embark upon. And an abstract has, though there are different types of abstract, but some key elements that need to be considered. The problem, what is it that you observe, that you have identified as a problem that has to be examined by you yourself and find a solution to? Now, that is actually the problem, or the aim or purpose of the abstract. Then the objective is the purpose. What am I working on? What is the goal? What am I aiming at? All those things have to be defined clearly, to be stated clearly in an abstract. I'm saying it in order to understand, a holistic observation and examination of the submission given to us. Now, when we examine the problem, we examine the purpose, the aim, and the purpose of that of the work. Then you look at the way to achieve that purpose, to achieve that goal. The way is that method. You see, I need to also make a differentiation, in fact, a distinction between what a method and methodology, what they are. A method is actually the way, the tool used by a researcher to achieve whatever I want to use. But the methodology is actually the justification of that method. Then, what are the results? What are the findings of your own observation, of your own work, field work? Then what is the conclusion? What is the contribution to knowledge? Now, when we examine all this, we discover that some aspects are missing in the submission given to us. Let us not forget also the aspect of originality. There is no research work without some element of originality. And that is why when I examine some of the submissions given to me and some of the abstracts that I was asked to examine, for instance, the abstract on From Neoliberalism, Africa's Development Paradigm to Critical Holism, the configuration. I'm tempted to say that, you see, the author needed to recast the title by saying reconfiguring the African development paradigm from neoliberalism to critical holism. That is actually a suggestion. Then you have the abstract on development in Nigeria, special implication. And this is actually an abstract that is too long in my own understanding. And there is no way you have paragraphs with an abstract. It's a compact, it's actually a body that is not too long, expressing your own idea in a very succinct way. Then you have the other submission, on beyond GDP's numbers and everything. I want to believe that there is no way we have abbreviation in an abstract. The abstract has to be clear, concise, and precise. All those things are very important in an abstract. Too many numbers are not needed in an abstract. Then moving to the other one, which actually the other ones that are given to me as to review, I noticed some typographical errors. For instance, in the New Global Order and the Future of Africa, you want to write unison, you write unison. Some of those things are giving, a wrong signal to the reviewer, to the examiner of the examinee, to the candidate submitting an abstract. Then finally, let me say this, that when we write, let us be very close to facts. Let's know what we are writing about, what we are writing on. Now, when we write in an abstract, something like Zaire does not exist anymore in any place in Africa. There is no place called Zaire anymore. It's the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yes, it was Zaire, but today it is actually Democratic Republic of Congo. So all those things, even in that abstract, West Africa the W was written with small letter, W. All those things need to be checked so that we have a very neat presentation of our abstract. Now, some questions were not raised. What is that question? What is that problem that needs solution? I think we need to have it in mind, the originality of our presentation. Some of the fundamental of the abstract needs to be reviewed. And I want to call upon everyone submitting, all the people that have submitted, to possibly have a rethink of what is the submission of an abstract. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter. At this point, I would like to, we have 15 minutes for conversation. So if there are any comments from any of the authors or questions, please, you can just raise your hand and we'll respond to that before we move forward. No questions?
I want to ask a question.
Okay, please
Good
go ahead.
Good
Introduce
morning.
yourself and go ahead, please.
Okay, my name is Mukolade Johnson. I'm from the University of Lagos, Department of Architecture. Good morning to the organizers of this forum. I appreciate the feedback, especially on my paper. My question is, I addressed my work from the standpoint of architecture, and I discovered that since yesterday, it has been theoretical approach to development that has been highlighted most of the time. My approach to this development is from the theoretical to the applicability of the theory in practical way of development that I'm used to professionally. So I want to ask whether the physical development, which is the crux of architecture, though backed by all kinds of intangible inputs, is not the drive of the publication or the book, because I highlighted some of the comments that the honorable reviewer made. You know that I'm using a qualitative or a phenomenological epistemic approach to my work. And I'm also coming from the language perspective. Hello?
You're muted. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. I hope you heard me so far.
Yes, you are talking,
Okay.
We got you until you spoke about the language perspective.
Yes, my research work in the past, somebody is muting me. Okay. My research work has been coming from the perspective of language as it affects development in our localities, how language has been the source of interaction every day, and also dictates what happens at the physical development levels. Because as an architect, you get your project through briefs, which are compilation of words, and from little more investigation, I discovered that it is what people say to you that you actually conceptualize and you use for anything that affects physical development. So I have approached my work from that perspective, and that has been really very clear in terms of how design concepts are developed through the use of metaphors. And it is this design concept that dictates what the architect does in the environment and how he affects his environment in terms of physical development. So I've tried to put that forward in this title, even though as advised, I will still go back and check it. But coming from this perspective is what is informing my work. So I would like to also get more clarification on the themes and all the goal of the publication. so that I don't work offline. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Your question is very well received. The thing is, this particular book, we intend to speak to a more general audience. We want the book to be relevant to policy actors, to academics, to civil society, even to people who just have an abiding interest in the progress of Africa, but may not have definite intellectual or theoretical sagacity. And that's why it needs to be a very simple book that is easy to take up and run with. It's, while you speak from I'm sure the abstract was very understandable to a fellow architect, but some of us in other disciplines may struggle a bit with understanding what you mean. And so it's important that as you're writing, and I say this for all our colleagues, to step out of our disciplinary boundaries and understand that we write for who we want to read our work. And the audience for this particular volume are primarily those who will implement African development. And who are those who will implement African development? We start with the policy actors. We move on to the state actors, international development practitioners, students, well, students in the knowledge institutions, as well as students of life. So please, let's just step a bit from our disciplinary reflections and attempt to be more open-minded and then write for the audience, because that's very important. If you understand what you want, if you have a very interesting approach or a game-changing solution, and the person that requires that solution does not understand what you are saying, then you are talking to yourself. And so it's important for us to be very sensitive to that nuance and make sure that we are speaking to our audience. Dr. Peter, you have a comment.
Okay.
Please unmute yourself, yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Lewanson, and Dr. One. I want to thank you for the very clear review of my paper. And I think both of you mentioned the fact that my title is a little bit nebulous. And I want to thank Dr. One. He has done the job for me by simply recasting that topic, and I will just take that which he has given. I think it makes a lot of sense. What I wanted to say, it's about, I think there's an advice when I reviewed, when I looked at the review that you made, said I should not criticize neoliberalism. I should just go ahead to show the gaps and how critical holism deals with those gaps that I find in neoliberalism as a development paradigm. But I thought what I was trying to do is to criticize neoliberalism so that I can use that as a launch pad to introducing critical holism. So I don't know how, maybe there's another way I could do that without necessarily having to criticize neoliberalism. That's what I would like you to help me kindly clarify.
Okay. All right. We have no issues about you criticizing neoliberalism. That's, like Dr. Iwilade said yesterday, our work as academics, as intellectuals, is very big on identifying gaps, criticizing, and not necessarily thinking through solutions. But that's where we want to change and ensure that the value that we contribute, the value that we bring by the production of this set of chapters goes beyond identifying the problem to preferring the solution. So Dr. Peter, we would really like you to criticize neoliberalism briefly, identify the gaps in neoliberalism, and then use that as a launch pad to explain how critical holism can be the game changer for Africa's development. Our core interest is in the issue, is in the solution, and not necessarily the problem. I hope that's fine.
That's very fine. Thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Any other comments, questions, please?
Could I also make a comment, Professor? I cannot see the
please, go
button.
ahead.
I'm sorry, I cannot
Okay.
see the button for raising my hand.
No
My name
problem. Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Sure, I'll do. My name is Fawcett Komolo. I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, the Technical University of Kenya. I presented a paper, an abstract on deconstructing public participation. And I want to thank the reviewer for asking certain exciting questions, pertinent questions really, that I find very relevant, that will add value. Nevertheless, I also get the impression that what I had hoped to communicate through the abstract perhaps has not come out clearly, and I hope it will come out maybe as we proceed with the process. For example, it comes out as if I am criticizing public participation. Indeed, I am criticizing public participation, but not holistically. I am trying to criticize or to critique public participation, and especially the brand of public participation that we practice here in Kenya, where there is what is emerging as pretty much the tyranny of the masses, and where professionals are not able to suggest or to provide certain ideas that are able to guide the society forward. And of course, such lengthy public participation processes are also used to sort of act as loopholes through which public funds are wasted. I think that also ties up with the idea that a lot of organizations that provide foreign aid today in Kenya, for example, have tied public participation as a precondition for their foreign aid. Now that also comes as a critique, and I probably need to make that clear, that while that is not a problem, the problem lies elsewhere, that a lot of funds are wasted, and typically a process that should identify a problem, provide solution, does not end there, because a lot of funds are wasted as the people discuss. So mine is to try to imagine another or potential alternative pathway that can lead maybe African nations that are having this brand of public participation to rethink it and to see how maybe loopholes can be removed from the process of public participation. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Fawcett. That sounds very interesting, and we look forward to reading your chapter as it goes along. We're making very good time. We can take one more comment or question. Is there anybody that would like to do so? Right, otherwise we can take a 10-minute break at this time to get a drink or to do a stretch, and then we will reconvene in 10 minutes time at 11:25 Lagos time so that we can proceed. Thank you very much, colleagues. But just before we go, because we have these 2 minutes, can we put on our videos and take a team picture at this time? So please switch on your video so that we can take a quick picture. Dr. Leshu. Okay, Dr. Leshu, please coordinate the taking of the picture. Please put on your video.
I'll look for him now before. Please do. Yeah.
If you can, please put on your videos, please. Okay. Okay, so in the next 10 seconds, we'll take the picture.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm taking it now. All right, so we're good to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we meet in 10 minutes time to continue. All right. Okay. All right, I think we can proceed now. So now we'll be looking at the chapters, the abstracts that were presented, that were submitted and fit into the thematic area of conceptualizing African development and African studies. And to perform a review, we have Dr. Kayode Iswola and Dr. Basirat Oyalowo. So I will hand you over to Dr. Kayode Iswola now to give us his comments on the various abstracts. Over to you, Dr. Iswola.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Professor Saibat Lawanson. I have 6 abstracts here, and haven't gone through all of them. And at the expense of repeating what has been said, a few issues that arise will be presented at this point. I'm going to divide the issues into 2. The first one will be generic, and then the latter part will be specific to each of the abstracts. The generic one first. You know, over the years in my interaction with colleagues' works, I discovered that there's always this tendency for colleagues, including all of us, to lose focus of the basic ingredients of abstracts because we want to pour out our desire, our ideas, our concepts in the paper. Aside from one of these abstracts, which I'll be mentioning in the specific, every other of the 5 is guilty of this, situation, so to say, as it were. For instance, most of these abstracts do not conform to what abstracts should do. And I think that generic statement is important. My teacher will always say, like play is a big work, abstract should never be abstract. I mean, if you are used to the theater world, when we sit in the theater, we watch play, we think we're enjoying. You only need to ask those who rehearse for 30 days and 30 nights before you know the kind of work that is there. So I think the same logic comes here in what I've seen in all this work. The abstract that will be good should be very clear in making a statement of idea. From that idea, a very unambiguous title should come. That title should snowball into objectives or questions. The 2 are not necessarily expected in an abstract because they can fit in for each other. And then after the questions, it is important that we know the method. After the method, there are anticipated findings that must be given to us. And the final part should be what is generally called conclusion. And it is from this conclusion that the scholar makes what we often regard to the theoretical statement of the paper. Every good paper, be it a chapter work or, a contribution to the learned article, must make a theoretical statement so that some other scholar will say that Ajanle Koko 2001 so claims, as it were. I think we must remind our colleagues who have written this that all these are expected in a very good abstract at any point in time. So as I've said, I see 5 of the paper wanting in all this, and that's why I decided, at the risk of repeating what has been said, to emphasize it so that they will know the seriousness. Now, secondly, observation 2 on a generic point, abstracts need not be referenced. When you write an abstract and you are saying, according to Sule 2004 inside the abstract, what are you then going to do in the paper? I think that should be avoided if possible. Then abstracts should also focus on a particular theme or call. Yeah, this sounds like saying the obvious, but when you read an abstract and you begin to wonder, what is the purpose of this workshop? And what is this abstract contributing in any way to this workshop? Then it becomes worrisome a bit. So I think that must be reminded too, that it does not have to be too long, then it has to focus on certain thematic area based on the call or any other thing that is given. Okay, now, at the specific level, I start by the first abstract that is titled Towards an Immanent Critique of Development. Towards an Immanent Critique of Development. And what I see here is an attempt by the author to explore what he calls immanent critique, of the concept of development. Now, the focus is to give a critique, and not just a critique, an immanent critique. Way forward, this author needs to tell us what he or she means by immanent critique. For me, that's the lever of the paper is going to present, that will be presented from this abstract, and cannot make it out, either implicitly or explicitly, in any part of this abstract. That must be addressed. Now, he's claiming that after perusal of literature, he arrives at the idea of immanent critique and linking it to Hegel and Jaggai's work and seeing them as a radical rethink of the connection between democracy and development. Well, I don't know if that is the submission. Then you must go back to the title and see whether that democracy is in or out of focus, okay? These are specific things that need to be done in this abstract after the generic information that I've put forward. Now, added to this, the language is very unclear, very ambiguous, sometimes, again, it happens to all of us in a bid to create impression that I have the concept, I have the idea. We continue to jargonize so much that we now render our communication, disabled. There will not be communication anymore. I think the author here should, rework the abstract in simple and clear language forms, so that we can enjoy what he or she is trying to say. Second one, and this for me is the abstract that speaks to what an ideal abstract should be. It is titled Extricating Africa's Donor Recipient Development Trajectory, no more catch 22. For me, in terms of the vital issues that should be in an abstract, this gives a good pass. That adds to the statement, it problematizes it, it raises objectives, gives us the method, and then, gives anticipated findings and then recommendation in very short form. I'm sure if I have to count, the words here should not be more than 200. And that for me is the beauty of an abstract. I think every other person who belongs to this this team that I'm working on should emulate what you have in two. However, even at that, the author here will do much better in future work and this if he or she addresses scholarship as what it is. A scholarly work is a living work. It's never a past tense. I mean, we say this, it's not subjected to debate. Plato says, he said it donkey years ago. He's still saying it because it's not the personality of Plato. It's Plato as a work that we're referring to. So when you write an abstract and are using past tense, this abstract decided or discovered, it then shows that the work itself is a dead on arrival. I think it should use simple present tense. This abstract claims, it recommends. That's the tradition that is dominant in global scholarship, but I think it should be respected. Okay, and then again in language, when the author says the findings reveal, revelation and findings are the same thing. So, I mean, this can happen to anyone, but it's a way of saying it's good to peruse more rigorously our language choice and choice of words before submitting abstract. But basically, this one meets the criteria much more than the other ones that I have here. The third one is titled Conceptualizing Work Values and Development from the Yoruba Ideology in Africa. Of course, this is a very long abstract. I'm sure it's going to about 500 words here, if I'm not mistaken, or 570. It doesn't have to. What is being said in 570 words here can as well be said in 270 or 170 if the author will go back and do the necessary thing. Okay, so this abstract is too long, number one. Two, it also falls short of those criteria that I mentioned earlier. I don't want to repeat them. It does not give us the basic ingredients of any good abstract. Okay, now, but apart from that generic one, what it tries to do is conceptualize work values and development from what he or the writer calls Yoruba ideology. I mean, you are saying that you want to let us know and put on the platform, the idea of work value and development, ideas of work values and development from Yoruba ideology in Africa. And the question that struck me as I was reading the title is, what does the person mean by Yoruba ideology? I tried to peruse the body of the work. I cannot find it anywhere. Of course, the phrase keeps recurring, Yoruba ideology, but there should be a précis, albeit not more than 1 or 2 lines, of what the person considered as Yoruba ideology. What is that ideology? I don't know. So that's key in terms of what needs to be done to make that abstract better. Finally, on the issue of specific, when you say you are teaching us something based on Yoruba ideology, I'm excited because you are trying to say we need to configure African studies. We need to reconsider the ideological platform upon which we raise our concepts and our arguments. However, I haven't raised my hope that much. I became a bit depressed when the same person is now using, Rostos theory, which is foreign and alien to Africa and Yoruba, to hang on an argument that is supposed to be doing otherwise. I think our people should know that theoretical framework is not necessarily the use of established theories that are dominated by Western scholars around the world. A theoretical framework is just it's a thesis that is built from a particular idea and that can support the statement that the research is trying to say. It doesn't have to be Rostos theory or something. A proverb can serve that purpose. You know, a saying can serve it, an aphorism can serve it, an idiomatic expression can serve it. It is built, that's why it's called a framework. It's built to create a good standing for the position of the paper, not necessarily a theory according to, it can be, but not necessarily a theory according to either James Blink or whatever somewhere. So all I'm saying is that if you raise our hope that you want to raise an argument based on Yoruba ideology, then your theoretical framework should not be reversing, you know, what you promise that you're going to do for us, as it were. Okay, so that moves me to the fourth one, which is titled African Studies and African Development, an African Feminist Perspective. At the risk of repetition, this abstract also falls short of the basic ingredients of an abstract. Perhaps I need to repeat in summary. What an abstract does is address the following question. What idea is on board? That is the call for paper or the theme. What is that idea? Now, what do you intend to do about that call, about that idea? How do you respond to that idea? That gives you your title and your problem. Then the next thing is, how do you want to do it within the acceptable framework of scholarship? Because you are operating within scholarly framework. How do you want to do it? That's where methodology comes in. You can't just do it anyhow. There must be a way of doing it based on the acceptable method that we use in the academia. That's why you need to tell us, because it's not abracadabra. You must let us know, this is the procedure, this is the method that I want to follow, as the case may be. Then when you do tell us the method you need to follow, then you must anticipate some things as findings. After doing A, B, C, permutation, analysis, hermeneutical interviews, what are you anticipating as your findings? And then when you have your finding, make a conclusion to arrive at a theoretical statement, a declarative statement based on that research that we can trace to your scholarship, and then we can then further interrogate for the purpose of expansion of knowledge. I'm sorry I'm repeating it, but I'm paying the bit that these ingredients are lacking in 5 of the 6 abstracts that are here. So that again, it tells us about the generic, but specifically to this one, which is saying African Studies and African Development, an African Feminist Perspective, okay? I mean, I don't see anywhere here where African feminists comes in to mark off the meaning, the ideas, and the concept in the paper. Perhaps it's trying to say something, but again, when you don't follow all these procedures and you don't give us this basic ingredient, it's sometimes difficult, if not impossible, to figure out what you are going to do or contribute in scholarly terms. But again, you know, I cannot trace where feminist perspective comes in here at all. So that has to be addressed. The next one, which is the 5th one, the last but one, the penultimate, is titled Thinking about African Development Through the Lenses of African History and Education Curriculum, as it were. Anyway, that title suffers on the last word. You know, there are 2 issues here: African history curriculum and African education curriculum. If there are 2, I think elementary English class will remind us that that word cannot be singular, especially when it's coming at the title. So the author needs to do something about that one. Now, what the author wants to do here is to attempt to think about African development via 1, history of the African people, and 2, how African people are educated. It's a bit unclear whether he's talking about education pre-colonial or post-colonial, because there are two dimensions to education, and these two must not be left, unattended to in this paper. But for me, the major challenge is that the first opening sentence in this abstract does not align, and that's if it does not negate, does not align with the title of the paper. They are at variance. I think there should be a synergy between the two, as it were. And running through the entire abstract, it appears most like a keynote speech on what President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, said some 20 years ago. He's citing Thabo Mbeki from the third line down to almost the penultimate line, the last but one line. And I was asking, is this supposed to be an abstract? Where are the objectives? Where are the questions? All those things that we said before are not there. While it is not impossible to cite, during abstract writing, I do not think this kind of thing should pass in for an abstract of a paper. Last one is titled Disease Prevention, a case study of abuké in the Yoruba community. Immediately I read that abstract, something struck me. How do colleagues should know that it is not compulsory that we use titles that have riders. Riders are even getting very unpopular. They are becoming unpopular in scholarship. Riders are good. They sound sweet. They give you, room to expand your thought. But if you must put rider, it's good to put rider correctly, or to put it in such a way that you don't lose the scope of what you are talking about. This is the suspicion in this last abstract. I read again the title: Disease Prevention, a case study of abuké in the Yoruba community. Abuké is not disease prevention. So that colon does not link it to it. Disease prevention is not abuké, and there is no connection with it. So there is need to rework that title to say what exactly the author wants to say. Unfortunately, only the author knows what he or she intends to say, because I struggle to get it clearly in the body of the paper. It is also significantly lacking and lagging behind in all those basic things that I spoke about in terms of writing abstract. And as I said, once those basic things are lacking, you didn't give us your problem, you didn't show us the objective that you need to achieve, you didn't show us how you are going to do it, and the reports, the findings that you're anticipating, then it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for us to even see what you want to do. So the writer of the abstract must take all this into consideration. Let me round off by emphasizing that I am not unaware that there are different approaches to abstracts. I am very much aware, i.e., an abstract can be informative, it can also be descriptive, it can be critical, it can be highlight. These are four very common approaches to abstract writing in the scholarship. But neither of the four can stand the test of time without taking into consideration all those major aspects that have been mentioned. I want to submit at this point, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to put forward my comment on this abstract. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Isuola. We now quickly go on to Dr. Basirat Oyalowo, who will share some reflections about the abstracts. Over to you, Dr. Basirat. Yes, go ahead. Just a minute, Dr. Basirat. The colleagues cannot hear very well. Dr. Eleshim, please, can you increase the volume? I don't know. Okay. Okay, can you try again? Go ahead, Dr. Basirat. Is it better?
Is it better?
Please, can somebody respond if they can hear now?
It's not
Let her
exactly
try it
better.
now.
I think she can improve on it.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. So, I was on.
I'm sorry, the sound is very faint. We can't hear.
The sound is very poor, please.
Okay, let her just round up. We shared her reflections.
That that are based on not from previous studies. They should resist from summarizing that study into this because there might be a loss of connection between what was the basis for the previous study and this work. So the authors should use the opportunity to reflect on previously collected to bring about the alternative Western ideologies that this is about. And lastly, on a particular abstract on care and development, I want to suggest that the author restructure the whole work to look at the interface between health and development, so as it's with the rest of the chapters in this section. So these are my thoughts.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Basirat. You share a reading reflection, maybe a few lines, so that the authors who could not hear because of the connection problem will be able to take advantage of your comments. All right, thank you very much. We'll let you go now. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so apologies, the network is quite poor on her side, but essentially her comments were to the extent that the authors need to be more reflective in their chapters. The authors need to resist the urge to just provide summaries of previous work, but cast a more critical lens even onto the theories and context that they are discussing. And for the colleague who is writing on Abuke to expand the scope of his work to look at health, the interface of health and development. That was a recommendation. So I think we can open the floor now for comments from the authors or other colleagues who may have one or two words to support the 6 abstracts that have been presented. Please indicate by raising your hand and introduce yourself and go ahead to speak. Okay, Professor Akinwale, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Taibat, for providing this platform to cross-fertilize ideas and fine-tune the focus and direction that authors are expected to follow. So ordinarily, I wouldn't have bothered to pass any comments if criticisms that Dr. Kayode Suola presented had been constructive. But I think this would be a form of advice to him in his future review. First, his comment on the tenses is not correct. To say that the tenses should be present tense if making reference to Plato or Aristotle. So what I think is logically acceptable is consistency. So an author may choose to report a review in past tense. If the author is not mixing past tense with present tense, I think this is acceptable. So it's not correct to say that author must, mandatorily adopt that present tense. So that's observation 1. Secondly, on the length of the abstracts, I think this varies from one publication outlet to another. And in this case, the call for abstract that we responded to did not actually specify. Dr. Isola can check again. There's no specification of whether the abstract should be of 200 words or 250 words. And in my own case, the length of my abstract is 330 words. Dr. Isola said that abstract is more than 500 words. Dr. Isola can check again. I believe he has a copy. That's not correct. I wouldn't have spoken on this if Dr. Isola correctly mentioned the number of words in my abstract. But for him to say abstract of 330 is more than 500 words is incorrect. And I think this is an advice for future intellectual engagement. Constructive criticism is always welcome because it provides an opportunity for improvement in the quality of scholarship. Then he asked a question on what is Yoruba ideology. Ideology simply means belief system. So there's no doubt about this. And the questions raised in the abstract clearly reflect this belief system of the Yoruba. And belief system encompasses a lot of things. Religion is part of it. Norms and values are part of belief system. Practices are part of belief system. That's about that. Then on theoretical framework, 4 theories were mentioned in the abstract. Dr. Ishola only focused on one, which is Rostos' theory of modernization. I find this theory also useful to explain the explanation of development from traditionalism to modernity. The Yoruba also has experience of change from traditional lifestyles to modern lifestyles. So the reason why this theory is put there is in line with the first problematic that informed this engagement, which is that the non-Western sociocultural practices have limited endorsements in the Western paradigm of development. And this Western paradigm of development we are talking about can be captured through the theory of modernization according to Rostos. That's the reason why that theory is put there. That theory is put there in order to expose the flaw in the, in the received paradigm. And the theory of Africology is there. The theory of Africology is a new model of Africanism. So that theory of Africology has, incorporated different strands, different models of Pan-Africanism, which it is at that point that the central focus of Yoruba belief system will find expression. Of course, there are other theories there too, social action theory, structural functionalism. So the abstract include 4 theories. I don't know why Dr. Ishola only made reference to Rostos' theory and, he just made his conclusion based on that. So basically, this is an advice. I think if review is constructive, the author will not have an option but to accept and to accept and appreciate the reviewer for making a valuable contribution to the intellectual discourse. So on this note, I want to thank Dr. Ishola for the work he has done, but I think he has not done a good job in the review of my own article. So, and I thank Professor Taibat for providing this opportunity for a kind of conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. We'll take note of your concerns. Thank you. Let's have Afis Sufiano, please. Afis Sufiano.
Thank you. Firstly, I have to appreciate the reviewer, Dr. Kayode Ishola. Just want to ask if there is any suggestion. You said there is no connection between the...
Sorry, please, can you please speak up?
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I want to ask Dr. Ishola if there is suggestion about the title of the abstract, because it's saying that there is no connectivity between the fifth definition and the issue of the case study of Abuke in Yoruba community. Because what I actually think before getting over the topic was that the way the Abuke is buried in Yoruba is a way of preventing disease in the community. But if there is any suggestion about any other, how to amend the topic of the abstract, I will actually welcome that. And concerning the comments of Professor Basia, I really appreciate that. And actually, the abstract is actually looking, or the topic or title is looking towards the social change and ethical perspective of Yoruba in terms of development. So thank you for making the suggestion to expand on health and development. I will look into that and I will see what I can do to that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll just find a way to talk to Dr. Iswola to get in touch with you so that you can, check the title of the abstract again and then suggest appropriate title for your work. In absence of any other comments and concern, I think we'll just go to the next session, which is the session 4 on culture, language, society, and the African Renaissance. These two will be handled by Professor Ayo Yusuf and my humble self, Suyeleshi. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Look at the photo pictures.
And I want to start by, first of all, give a general comment on these abstracts, in this sub-theme. I want to plead with the investigators to make available the little book on development to writers of abstracts. There you have several definitions of development from many perspectives. Doing this will help in sharpening some of the points I want to mention. We'll give some focus to some of these abstracts. And the second one is that in the call, it is specified that abstracts should not be more than 300 words. So abstracts that are more than that should be adjusted to maintain 300 words or less. I want to start from this abstract titled Global Politics in the Development Modern Theater Architecture in Nigeria, a comparative evaluation of National Theater Nigeria, NTN, and the Bulgarian Palace of Culture and Sports. First of all, the lead phrase there, global politics in the development, I have a feeling that the preposition is missing there, off. Global politics in the development of modern theater architecture in Nigeria. Generally, why it is very good to compare, the issue of development should be taken very seriously. The questions I want to ask are
please, I cannot hear the speaker.
You are muted, Prof.
Yes.
Prof. Yusuf, you are muted.
I'm muted, yeah.
Sorry for that gap due to the internet. Now, I was talking about this abstract that's titled Global Politics in Development of Modern Theater. The off is my own addition anyway. That off is not there, and I think that it is missing. It will, if it is there, it will give it more meaning. And I was just asking questions that will lead to this abstract being
put in some perspectives that will address what I think the writer has in mind. What was the problematic? What was this problematic? I mean, how was this problematic to the Africanist ideal? What could have been done differently? Have there been transitions to better or worse approaches since then? What lessons do we learn from this? What do you mean by modern theater practices in the context of African development? It is important here to note that there is African traditional theater, and it should be mentioned. Where was this kind of theater practiced then in the indigenous system? It is good for us to be able to link what was and what is, especially when the writer is talking about locations, National Theatre of Nigeria and Bulgarian Palace of Culture and Sports. The second one I want to talk about is the one titled A Comparative Study of COVID-19 Precautions and the Yoruba Beliefs on Communicable Diseases. Again, it is very needful for this to be properly linked with development. And that again brings my recommendation that a book that has been published on this project before now to be made available to writers so that they can avail themselves of the various definitions from various perspectives that are in that book. Can we hinge this article on the theoretical and philosophical assumption that Yoruba indigenous beliefs align with the globalizing world order regarding health? How do we center this indigenous knowledge system in global health messaging and practice using COVID-19 as an entry point? Yoruba indigenous healthcare strategies will be explored and compared with the global world order using the COVID-19 experience, exploring various WHO documents on such communicable diseases. I think here that we should take cognizance of how COVID-19 was approached, and the fact that it did not spread as it was envisaged by the global north. How was it handled? How do you deal? How were we able to get out of it? And then to also stress that those who we assume to be vulnerable did not actually suffer from it as much as those that have access to modern medical solutions. The third one is this one titled Deconstructing Development in the Context of Culture, Society, and the African Renaissance. This is an abstract that really impressed me. But we still need to look at it this way again, perhaps. How does the African Union document, the Africa we want, align or contradict the African Renaissance approach? What is the place or value of Africa in the global order? Who or what is Africa? Are there specific contexts through which these reconstituted yardsticks, indicators, and tools can be piloted? Then there is this addition. This abstract does not have keywords. I think keywords can be generated from this abstract. This abstract is very promising. It's very promising. The next one, which is titled Nigerian Literature as a Force to be Reckoned with, the new trend amongst Brazilian scholars towards a decolonized future. This is also a promising abstract. But there should be a link between Nigerian literature and development. Aside from that, this abstract should also look at issues beyond development in literature. Development in literature. What does the content of literary works? What does that content say about development? And how does the content, how will the content express development, whether individual or collective? Yoruba online adverts, a macro sociolinguistic approach. The title, sociolinguistics approach. If sociolinguistics is supposed to be an adjective, then it should be sociolinguistic approach. Here, we have to look at, we need to answer the following questions. What is the place of Yoruba cultural practices in marketing? Are the Yoruba people the only markets for these products? So how can Yoruba indigenous beliefs align with the globalizing world order regarding business and transaction? How do we center this indigenous knowledge system in global marketing practice using the internet stroke online adverts as an entry point? To what extent does this knowledge of sociocultural awareness of the Yoruba language contribute to the African development narrative? How can it be leveraged? What is the place of Yoruba culture in the digital world? Is the digital world not an extension of the real world? And then we have to look at the issue of costuming in those that are video. If you speak a language and the language does not match the costume, how does it affect? And then all of these should also be linked with development. Are we talking about cultural development here or linguistic? Archaeology, culture, and the development question in Africa. I think this is very ambitious because it's talking about Africa, but notwithstanding, it's still redeemable. The following questions should be addressed. What are the current gaps in the relationship between culture and development in Africa? What are the consequences? What should have been done better? What is the way forward? And then the author should take this into consideration. I have a brief mention of the significance of archaeology and culture in development to make this abstract wholesome. And then a question is very pertinent here. Why should culture be the basis of development? What are the conceptual and empirical arguments for this position? What dimensions of culture is this chapter championing? The next is this one titled An African Urban Future of Lagos based on the National Theatre History. These also lacks keywords, which are easily derivable from the abstract. And then this abstract should also be linked properly to development. I want to reiterate here again that we should have a look at various definitions that have been provided by scholars by development. It is going to, at least you have one or two of them that will be able to address your abstract and sharpen this abstract more than we have it.
The author should answer the following questions. What is the key research question here and the objective of this chapter? What is the contribution to the African development discourse? What are the linkages between the recent and far past in Lagos? Why are we even comparing? Why are we comparing? The next is the fourth industrial revolution, a boon or bane on the colonization of Africa, implications for African languages. The topic itself, let's start from the topic. If it's a question, then it should be in an interrogative form. Is the fourth industrial revolution a boon or bane on the colonization of Africa? Then we can now have the following phrase that is there, implications for African languages. In what ways and towards what ends is the fourth industrial revolution linked to sociality? What do you mean by skewed appropriation here? How will this expand the grounded understanding of development? It's important for us to have it at the back of our mind that the basis for this group project is all about development. And then we want to see this issue being approached from various perspectives. The new governance of comics festivals in Africa for African Renaissance. This abstract lacks research question. What is that question? What is the objective of this chapter? And what does it contribute to the African development paradigm? We are talking about experiences here. What are the experiences? And how do these experiences affect development, as is stated in the abstract? The next is this abstract titled, Improving Public Health Education in Nigeria, Decolonizing Public Health Education and Policy through Indigenous Folk Tale Telling. Well, this particularly should be properly linked to development. How does it contribute to development? How does this also contribute to the wider conversation on health messaging, African development, and language preservation? What can other African societies learn from this? The author needs to provide some empirical evidence, highlighting the pros and cons when we're talking about background. And last but not the least, metaphor as urban architectural language, reflecting indigenous custom. Well, we know that architecture is an art, it's a social science, and it's also a science. Now, linking this with development would perhaps need us to look at indigenous architecture and see how it has not been urbanized. Here, we are looking at urban architectural language. When you say urban here, are we referring to imported architectural designs as we have all over the place now? If we are talking about development, won't we be looking at how indigenous architecture will have been modernized, retained, and then given some modern touches, while they are still retained, why we can still see the aesthetics and the art in them? This also needs to be linked up properly with the idea of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yusuf. We have, we'll now invite Dr. Leshin to give his own reflections. We're running a bit behind time, but we'll make up for it and still close at our designated time. So over to you, Dr. Leshin.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm audible enough. Okay, so I'll just give a few minutes reflection of the whole submission in this particular section. But let me start by reading an aspect of the call. And a sentence at the tail end of the call reads, all abstracts must have the following, and the must is in capital letter. All abstracts must have the following. What? And that what is the objective and contribution to knowledge. Why? Linkage to global narrative and theoretical underpinning. And the third one is how, which is the methodology. And then so what, which should be the possible findings or outcome of the whole abstract. I see that most importantly, the third question, which is why, which is the how, was missing in almost all the submissions that we had in this particular section. I think that we need to find a way to establish how this research is going to be done. It's very, very important, just as earlier speakers have said, that even if you have an idea about presenting a research study, it's very important for us to establish a method, an acceptable method of doing this. And if you think you have a new method that you want to propose, then you let us know that this work might actually propose a new methodology. It's very, very important. And I think this is conspicuously missing in some of the abstracts. Quickly, the abstract on folktale, the health implication of folktale. I'm not very sure about the title, but I just think that the last word in that abstract is really not needed. You know, let me see if I can get it here. Okay, improving public health education in Nigeria, decolonizing public health education and policy through indigenous folktale telling. You don't need to put the telling again, just put through indigenous folktale. So Prof has spoken to that already. I said here that methodology issues on achieving the aim of African development dynamics is very, very important, so that we know what mode or what means are you using to achieve this, your particular aim in developing methodology. And my general contribution to the abstract submitted for this session is that because this session talks about culture, language, and society, you know, these practices are very, very vital to everybody. There's no way that it's very important. It's what we do daily. And I said that just like religion, human relationship, perception of our worldview generally, I think that instead of always reacting to what has evolved, because due to colonialism, we have seen emergence of different ideologies, and that's what has birthed this idea of decolonization. That's what we are struggling with all this while. You know, yesterday, Professor Tadia said something about colonialism, decolonialization, and development, that all these are intertwined. And if you're not careful, we will not even be able to achieve that development we are looking for, because we are still struggling with decolonizing. Yeah, it's very important. You know, we have been talking about decolonization, and I don't know when I'm going to stop talking about decolonization. And because of that, we've not been able to look inward and present what we have. So instead of just presenting what we have, we are busy rejecting what has been given to us, that we don't want this, we don't want this. Yeah, we don't want it, but it's very difficult for us to reject it completely. So rather, I feel we should just try and look inward, present what we have, because no matter how we try to protest, we are finding it so difficult to completely achieve this decolonization process. So I said that instead of expressing our intuitive potentials, we are busy shedding off these alien entanglements. And it's difficult for us to do that completely. When we look at language, for instance, in our society, it's difficult for us to, for instance, ask people not to decolonize language in its entirety. It's very, very difficult. And then also minding the fact that it's going to be very difficult for us to go back to the last century and start speaking our indigenous languages the way we used to. You know, we've not even had a chance to sit down and think of how this language, our indigenous languages would have developed over the years. But rather we are busy fighting colonial languages. We don't want colonial languages. We don't want colonial culture. You know, why don't we just try and look inward and then present this? Let them also start thinking of, these people are presenting something instead of fighting what may not be even necessary now. I will just take this example from the work from the National Theatre and the Bulgaria Palace of Culture and Sport. I put down here that how has this affected development trajectory of arts and culture in Nigeria vis-a-vis the situation in Bulgaria, because it's also a kind of comparative analysis where we are comparing what is being done in National Theatre in Nigeria with what is being done in Bulgaria Palaces of Culture and Sports. Maybe because there are two different realities, so it's difficult for us to achieve that, you know, comparison in a very subtle way. So the author might need to start struggling to bring out the correspondence between the two entities. So it's very important for us to look inward. In all the abstract, I think it's very important for us to look inward. Please just let us present what we want to present and see, most importantly, see how we can link our ideas to development in Africa. That is the most important thing, and we have not been able to achieve that very well. Just like Professor Yusuf said, we need to look at the documentary, look at it once more, and let's listen to what different various scholars, African scholars have said about development. And then if you also have the access to the Little Book of Development, it's also important for us to look at it. And then all this will be able to help and improve our abstract towards the writing up of the main chapter for the book. So that is my contribution for this session. Thank you very much. Prof.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Leshi. I think rather than going into the interactive session, because of time, we can just invite Dr. Akimayo Akinotiko to take over so that we can respond to the abstracts that were presented under Decolonizing African Development, Ethics and Moralities. We can then have a conversation, interaction on the 3 sessions after that. So Dr. Akinotiko, after him, Dr. Ademola Fayemi will speak. So over to you, Dr. Akinotiko. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank you for inviting me to speak to this abstract. I want to begin by congratulating those whose abstract have been accepted, because it just shows that you are a stakeholder. And that's the way we should approach this, that you're a stakeholder and they want your voice to count. And that's very, very important. So what I'm just going to be doing is to speak to each of the abstracts and say what I think about them and how you can indeed be a stakeholder in this business. This book is meant to be a book that will be read and referenced very, very often and significantly in Africa. So I'll begin with the first one, which is the fourth industrial revolution, a boom or bane on the colonization of Africa, implications for African languages. this is a very, very good intention, but it speaks from a typical aspect of an African, as the abstract says, that Africa is not considered when the fourth industrial revolution is being planned. And the first thing that comes to mind as I read through the abstract is, why do we want Africa to receive? Why do we want Africa to be just a partaker? Why don't you think of this chapter as being speaking to Africa being a player? And then speaking particularly to the intention of the abstract of this chapter, which is the language. Why don't you do this chapter to create the language that the fourth industrial revolution must use? And so that brings Africa into the discussion when you speak development, rather than have the whole world create something that will be understandable to Africa. Why don't you create? And that speaks to development in itself. What is wrong with Africa creating a language that can be marketed to the world? Can the author speak to what Africa has to offer the fourth industrial revolution? That's what I will be saying about the first abstract. And I also would like to hint that the author should also highlight the method that is intended for that chapter. The second abstract is from integration to cooperation, the regional development in Africa. Now, this abstract identifies a focus, which is developmental frameworks in Africa. But the method intended for the work does not fit. The work questions the newly launched African Continental Free Trade Area as a framework. It does not show how it is different from the plethora of regional development frameworks that he says have failed. And now he wants to create a new one. He's proposing a new one. And the question will be, how will this new one be different, and why will it not fail? Clearly, he says this chapter consequently advances development cooperation as an alternative strategy for regional development. Why? What happened to the past, and what will prevent this one? So it's important for the chapter to look at, to do a critical evaluation of all the other frameworks and speak to why this will work and why this will not be like what has happened in the past. Again, the method is important, and it will be nice to have a theory that will guide this particular chapter. The third one is recasting development from the milieu of social justice movements in Kenya. Now, when I read this abstract, it seems to me to view development from the experience of those in the fringes is an interesting piece of work. However, the last paragraph speaks to an already determined position, a new version of Pan-African version of development. This view may not be open to data that will be collected. If you have already said what you want to do, when you intend to go to the people in the fringes to gather information, there is a theory called that helps you to develop a theory from, it's called the grounded theory. The grounded theory helps you to go to the field, listen, observe, and come up with a theory that narrates the experience rather than go to the field to justify the theory we have. And I'm saying that particularly to this abstract because you want to, and it's an interesting thing. When you talk development, you look at those in the fringes. So it's good for you to consider that. Now, the next abstract is towards a mental decolonization for African development. Good thinking, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. However, there is need to ask what the content of the African mind is. Are there no universal qualities that Africa shares with the West? So it doesn't look like, oh, everything that has been given to us you have to decolonize. It's good to understand what Nkrumah was saying. So it's not as if we're saying everything is to the left and we now have to create. So what I'm asking that this chapter can do so as to be a proper stakeholder is to consider questions that are important, because they would help us to know what is natural to development, and it's not continent specific. It is human development, and it's not epoch determined. So whatever is development is development. A good example will be things that have changed over time that in the past have been Africa tagged. For example, polygamy, you easily would have been said, oh, this is African, but it's just a developmental consequence of time. So it should be that the author would also think of what exactly, in precise words, you want to decolonize and what Africa will be doing. What are the contents? Now, the next abstract is Decolonizing African Studies and Development, a case study of Nigerian history and historians. A beautiful concept, because a lot has been said about Africa being viewed from the colonial perspective. So it's good for the abstract to clearly state what it wants to do. It's difficult to understand the possibility of decolonizing the history, but it is possible to decolonize the method in which the history has been written, the context in which the history has been written. That way you can now speak to development and speak to what you intend the future to have. And that gives it African nature, African context, especially when you're speaking African studies. Now, the next abstract speaks to contextualizing African development, a decolonial approach, Now, it is a good thing to engage reflexivity in the analysis of development in Africa. However, the theory already disposes the work to see development in Africa as a one-sided effort, which may ultimately prevent whatever has helped Africa, even though it is a colonialist gap. This is what I mean by saying that if you look at it, contextualizing African development, a decolonial approach, it's good to look at development for its sake. It does not matter how or who brought it about. It's good to look at this development, and then we can better interpret and understand what has happened. And I'm saying this because every chapter in this book is a language, is a contribution, and it's important. So the approach is of essence. Now, the next abstract that I'm going to be speaking to is the reassessing development through recognition of human development. This claim is interesting, although I wonder how it can be justified. Does the author intend to say development magnifies how Africans are disappointed, how governments have failed, and so on? Is it trying to say that development contrasts with African reality? So it's important to be clear here. What exactly are we saying? Reassessing development through recognition of human development. Are you saying if you place development side by side what is real in Africa, then we will be able to see that Africa really needs a lot to happen. Or are you saying that the developments in Africa in themselves are signs of disillusion, disappointment, or what exactly? So it's not too clear what this chapter intends to do. Again, methodology is important and it has to be highlighted. Now move on to the next one, and this is very fascinating. I know it is possible to use sacred books as models, but in this case, I read through this abstract a couple of times, and I see it trying to celebrate morality as a legitimate platform for development. I think there are two things. If one has morality and development, it's a case of buy one, get one free. But development can be achieved without morality. Basically, you do not have to be a moral person to bring about development. And so, yes, you can still use sacred texts, but where they come to play and work well is when you use models. Now you have attempted to use character, but you can use models of development found in sacred texts. So I will speak to particularly to the author of this chapter to look at this whole concept, to rejig it and look for a model, a process, rather than just talk about Nehemiah's lifestyle, moral lessons for decolonizing and development in Africa. But it's not to dismiss the fact the reality of sacred books have been sources of models, of moral principles or theories. But it's not enough to just use someone's character as a platform for development. Generally, I think these abstracts can basically look at the basic format of abstract. You have the introduction, you have the purpose. Introduction speaks to background, you have the purpose, you have the theory, and they speak to the method and then what you intend to do. Otherwise, I'll say congratulations to all the authors. You are stakeholders, and I think we need to stress that so that this book will come out well. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Aki Otiko. So we quickly move on to Dr. Fayemi now for his reflections.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this program for the invitation. For me, 7 abstracts were presented, and I could see that the connecting point in all of these abstracts is the issue of development looked at from different angles. And the first abstract here, I'm not going to give a critical remark that is going to condemn the work, but just to highlight areas where the perspectives established or proposed to be established by the authors can be enriched. Take for instance, in the first abstract on Fourth Industrial Revolution, the author is trying to say that Fourth Industrial Revolution is not something that is driven from African indigenous ideas. And for me, my thinking is that to the extent that many African states do not produce technologies as they are consumers of knowledge, it may be over-assumptuous to think that the Fourth Industrial Revolution will only make sense if situated and driven by African languages, as the author seems to claim. We may ask ourselves some questions. What is the investment on research that can drive Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa? Okay, what is the research agenda of higher institutions in Africa? We may take the case of South Africa as an example. They have intensive research agenda on driving Fourth Industrial Revolution, many of the universities there. So the author may want to contextualize the discussion by picking some given examples, lively examples. To the second abstract on from integration to cooperation, the key position of the author here is that development cooperation as an alternative strategy for regional development in Africa should be pursued. But my question is, why grounding the work on a logic of exclusion? Okay, will it not be better if we have a complement of both cooperation and integration, rather than abandoning integration in spite of its supposed flaws? Having said this, the third abstract has to do with recasting development. I want to believe the title might be looked into. However, I think a decolonial approach to development as a space for social and class struggle, as a contestation of literature paradigms and approaches to development seems to be promising, to be a promising contribution that the author wants to make. However, beyond the author that the scholar wants to use, which is Issa Shivji's theory of development, the author may also consider Dolu-Gasheni's decolonial theory of development. He has so many works, so that comparative insight can enrich the work. The fourth abstract reviewed here is on mental decolonization, and that abstract has something to do with the fifth abstract as well. They are both connected. This paper is more of an attempt to balance, to defend the externalist approach to the development discourse. And I think we may need to balance such approach. The whole idea of blaming the bane of development in Africa on mental colonization may not be too sufficient. It is important to also look inward. First, by discovering what indigenous notions of development are, and the short book on development by the editors of this proposed book may be quite useful in that regard. Talk about the fifth abstract, which is a decolonial approach to development. I find quite interesting the colonial feminist approach that the author wants to use. However, at some point, there seems to be this conflation between this decolonial feminist approach and relational approach to development. So I will advise that it is better for the author to provide the justification for the choice of one rather than these two models. The sixth abstract is on recognition as a model of human development. I think the work needs to be contextualized, quite more general, blanket statement about the state of development in Africa. And writing from a philosophical angle, I want to ask if the author's attempts to use Axel Honnot's theory of recognition can be justified, bearing in mind that Honnot, in its own theory of recognition, did not discuss development directly. So how that inference from his theory of recognition will connect to the idea of human development is left to be seen in that particular work. The last abstract is on Nehima's lifestyle and how that can serve as a good template for development. The basic issue here is that the author did not make us, did not bring into clear focus who Nehemiah is, and the anchorage of good leadership style of Nehemiah on the religious model, on God, may not be too welcoming, especially in a secular, emerging African world. So I will advise the author to look at this angle. But in all, these are very promising abstracts in line with the call for paper. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Fayemi. I think we can now throw the doors open for interaction. If you have a comment, a question, please, on the three sessions, Please raise your hands quickly or unmute yourself. Tengu, please go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Thank everyone that have contributed so far. I appreciate every reviewer and their reports. I appreciate more Professor Yusuf, who reviewed my abstract. Actually, I got his review report, and I was very impressed with some of the comments that he made in the report. For the benefit of everyone, because I can hearing from every abstract and speakers, I realize that I'm the only person that is in archaeology in this group, and doing something relating to cultural heritage. I want us to know that everything we are doing concerning development is heritage. It's our heritage, our common heritage, whether it's human development, whether it's physical development, whatever we are doing is heritage. And so my concern in my chapter, which is archaeology, culture, and development question in Africa, has to do with what is the development drive in Africa of benefit to the people, because culture is about the people. Like I said yesterday in one of my comments, any development that is alien to the culture of the people in which the development is intended for is not cannot be impactful. So this chapter, or what I intend to bring to the table, is how we conceptualize development around culture, trying to bring impactful development to the people, because every development is the benefit of the people. And so what do the people need? What are the needs at a particular point that we are trying to provide as policymakers, as stakeholders? What are the needs? It's not just about bringing anything to be. It's about fulfilling the needs of the people. That is one. And then archaeology, I appreciate him so much for asking me to bring in at least a line about the significance of archaeology. Archaeology is a study that talks about human development from time immemorial to the present. So we make use of material remains to discuss this concept. In that, in this book, I want to say that archaeology is very important because it is the discipline that guides and protects the cultural heritage or our common patrimony in the whole world. And Africa is at the center of this because Africa is the cradle of humankind. Man first evolved in Africa. So if we're talking about development, it will be very important that we look at what man was doing. What man was doing in Africa that later even migrated to other places of the world and continue doing. We have to look at that. So it's very important, whatever we are doing, archaeology protects it as heritage of the people. So it's good not to leave that aside. And
All
also,
right, thank you, Mr. Tengu. Thank you. You can add other comments in the chat box so that others can have a chance to speak.
It's all right. It's all right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Please, any other comments? Nikita, you said Nikiwe, you said your paper was not reviewed. Please put the title of your chapter in the chat room. And then any other comments at this point? Okay. So we're due for a 10-minute break now, but it will only be 5 minutes so that we can meet up with the time. So please, let's take a break now and return at 1:05 Lagos time. Thank you.
The last session for this event, which is a presentation of African Studies and Publishing Dynamics, to be handled by Professor Taibat Lawansi. But before I introduce her, I'd like to respond to a concern by one of the authors, Nikki Way. Nikki Way complained that she did not hear the review of her book, of her abstract. This is not right. Maybe she wasn't available when Dr. Isola spoke to her abstract. What we'll do is I'll get in touch with Dr. Isola so that we can make a review available to you. That should be okay. And also we are trying to make this recording available to all the authors. I hope that is fine. All right, so let me introduce Professor Taibat Lawansi to speak on African Studies and Publishing Dynamics. Prof.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Leshin. I'm just going to go briefly and just, now we're in the final session and I just want to speak about some of the issues that have to do with the actual act of preparing your chapters. So this book project is being supported by the African Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Bayreuth. And this cluster of excellence is on the Lagos African Cluster Center of the University of Lagos, which is the convener of this writing workshop, and this book series is a member of the African Multiple. And the African Multiple has a book series with Brill academic publishers called the African Multiple Book Series. And the overarching aim of that series is to advance the study of Africa and its diaspora through offering a forum for multidisciplinary research. And that speaks directly to the volume that we're curating now, because we have researchers from different disciplines that are looking at the concept of, or that are reimagining the concept of development from their various disciplinary leanings. And so we are looking to achieve two things regarding this book that align directly with this series. The first is to overcome the existing power imbalance in the production and transmission of knowledge in African studies. And that is why we started the entire series of thinking through concepts and context of African development last year by focusing on people of African descent, whether living in Africa or living in the diaspora. And the authors that have submitted to this volume are also fall within that context. They are of all of African descent and are based at institutions in Africa as well as in the diaspora. And so it is a very important work because it makes a statement about African development from the context or through the lens of African intellectuals. And so it is an important work, and we hope we'll be able to push forward a distinct message that outlines how African futures can be reimagined using concepts, theories, and examples of Africa-led approaches. Now, it's important for us. The thing is, even though we're affiliated to the Africa Multiple Center, to the Africa Multiple Cluster, getting your book published is not an automatic thing. we will have to submit an application, a proposal, a book proposal along the line after the chapters have come in, and the editorial board, the series editors will look at the volume and then choose whether to approve or not. Some of the ways that will determine whether they will approve or not are dependent on if the chapters in the book offer critical reflections on area studies on the cities or countries that they are looking at. If the chapters in the book sets new standards for collaborative researchers, particularly the chapters that are co-authored. And if the chapters in the book help us to understand Africa in a way that emphasizes relationality and reflexivity. What does that mean? Relationality, looking at the place of Africa in the larger global order, and amplifies the issues that make for the promotion of the African ideals. And reflexivity, meaning to look inwards and to ensure that one is not essentially being emotional, but one is able to push forward a logical, clear, intellectual argument that contributes effectively to knowledge. Remember that even though this volume is an Africa-led and African lens body of work, it is intended to be a contribution to universal knowledge. And so we must keep that in mind. And so the reason why we are bringing this up to you at this time is to let you know that not all the chapters that we've accepted your abstract, but there may be a reason to reject we've accepted your abstracts, but there may be need to reject your drafts when they come, if they do not meet these minimum conditionalities for us to publish. And I think the conditionalities are pretty standard. We must, have critical reflections. We must be able to contribute in a nuanced way, and we must be able to position Africa in the world and also Africa, the African agency. And to that end, we will take you back to the beginning. At the point when we set out the call, we highlighted these 5 key learnings from our project of last year. And the 5 key learnings have been reiterated this morning, talking about how the 5 major issues that we need to look at intellectually as African intellectuals as we go ahead looking towards a preferred future for the continent. The first is that African development in itself requires contextualization, that the development trajectories need to be decolonized, that we need an urgent cultural renaissance, and that the process of Africa's development should be an inclusive one, and that the governance of Africa and her development require extensive reforms. So those are the 5 key pillars that we are building this book on. And it's important that we keep those on our fingertips as we start to write. Therefore, we just want to push a few things to you. We're going to share the slides so that you can be acquainted with all these issues as you start writing. The thing is, when you start to write, it's important that you reflect on this question. The first is that these 5 learnings, which of them does your work address? What we see is that the 4 thematic areas that we have outlined speak to these 5 key learnings. So it's important that in developing your chapters, that you develop with an eye or with a mind's eye, with a sensitivity to these 5 issues. We then need you to ask yourself along the line, which theoretical or conceptual constructs are you critiquing? What can we learn from the context you are exploring, either geographically or thematically, that can aid our understanding of African development? Remember, I said at the beginning of this conversation that we are not looking for problematizing African development anymore. While we can problematize at the beginning of the chapter, what is of most interest to us is going beyond problematizing to reimagining how things can be, to, visioning a future for African development or a future for Africa. And that is what we want to achieve with this book. So you need to remind yourself and ask yourself, to what extent can the ideas that I'm sharing allow us to understand development in Africa better? There's also an issue whereby quite a number of the abstracts were very generic, focusing on Africa as an entity. It's important for us to remind you that Africa is not a country, it is a continent of 54 countries. Therefore, as much as we can, let us focus on case studies or contextualize our leanings, our discussion, ensuring that whatever it is that we're writing about, we're thinking about, we are able to reflect them, we're able to frame them in such a way that other African cities, other African countries that share similar characteristics are able to gain. Remember that we are contributing to the global knowledge production. We're contributing to global knowledge production. Therefore, whatever it is that we're writing must be written in such a way that highlights, the agency at scale, whether it's at community level, whether it's at city level, whether it's at country or regional level. Please be sensitive to that. And then another question is, how does your chapter promote African futures thinking, scenario building, and policy development? That goes back to the issue that we said that we want to move beyond merely problematizing African development to pushing for imagining or promoting African futures thinking. And that will take us to the question of what can we learn from this chapter that supports how Africa's future development trajectories can be sustainable, realistic, and fit for purpose. So let us keep that in mind, knowing that we are writing for an audience that includes policymakers, international development experts, academics from various disciplines, and a general audience that is interested in Africa. And that takes me directly to a more practical issue of developing the chapter. In order to make it coherent and consistent across the 38 chapters we are expecting now, please be guided by this. In developing your chapters, please follow this format of a title, your name, introduction section, the main text structured into subheadings, conclusions and reflections on African development futures, acknowledgements, if any, and then referencing. The chapter should have a title page, which will be the title, the author's profile, and the abstract. The author's profile we're looking for is your name, your institutional affiliation, and your email address. The abstracts should be reworked to not more than 250 words. We started with 350. but please, when you're submitting your title, please rework it to 250 words. We are not asking you to resubmit your abstracts at this point because we know that by the time you start writing, certain things may change. So we request that you revise your abstract at the point of submitting your first draft. And then the conclusion must include a section or a paragraph on reflections on African development future, just because we are looking to reimagine the context, the concepts of African development. And then we're adopting the referencing style, APA 7th edition. It is easy to get, but we'll be sharing via email with you what that entails.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof.
I'm not finished.
Okay.
My screen is okay. Yeah. Okay, so let me go back to this. Now, please develop your chapters using MS Word, Microsoft Word. Some of you submitted PDFs. Please submit your abstract, your chapters in Microsoft Word so that it will be easy for us when it's time for peer review. And then you are supposed to develop a maximum of 8,000 words, including references. No auto formatting. We want single line spacing and one line between your various paragraphs. You can use the Times New Roman or Arial fonts, the title font in bold and in 12 point and the text in 11 point and not bold. Please ensure that the headings are in normal case as against what's it called, uppercase, and use footnotes sparingly. Use footnotes only when it is absolutely necessary, and please do not use endnotes. Your first drafts are due by October 4th, 2002, so we have about 3 to 4 months to develop our manuscripts. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Leshi.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. In the next 5 minutes, we want participants to ask questions on this presentation or what you think is not very clear to you so that we can answer that now. If you have questions relating to our presentation, can you please raise your hand? Although we are still going to make available these slides, but it's very important for us to ask questions if there are parts of this presentation that you don't understand. Or you have reflections, you have concerns on all the sessions that were okay. I don't think, okay. John Yajali. John, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, so thank you very much. I must say I'm very thrilled to be part of this wonderful group. I've observed that many of the chapters we are presenting are going to be more of empirical data from the field. And in that case, I wanted to know, those of us from far who have to travel to conduct this research, whether there are some funding support, and if not, if one applies for a third funding support, how would that issues of declaration of intent and all that, how would that fit into this project? So I would be glad if that aspect is highlighted in terms of funding for this particular project.
All right, thank you. Professor Lawansi, would you like to answer that question?
Yes. Thank you very much, John. Unfortunately, we don't have funding regarding the carrying out of the actual research. because that is beyond our remit. Our funding support is simply to support authors through the process of writing and through the process of developing the manuscript for a publisher's approval. So you will have, if you need funding, you will have to source that independently. If you require us writing to confirm that your manuscript is going to be considered for this book to support your funding application, we are happy to do that. But apologies, we don't have enough funding. I wish we did, but we don't have enough funding to support the development or the research behind the various chapters. I hope that is okay with you, John.
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. Okay, so Nikiwe, can you please unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thanks. Am I audible?
Yeah, very well.
Okay, I had issues with my network, so I'd appreciate it if you'd repeat the name of my reviewer. Then my second question is, what happens if during the course of my research, because as the reviewers were talking and the other authors were giving input, I remembered some work done by another scholar at the University of Mpumalanga. So I just thought to myself, what happens if during the course of my research, I discover that I might need to co-author this chapter with somebody who I had not initially applied with? What then should I do? Is that acceptable to bring in somebody to co-author this chapter with me at a later stage? Should that be the case? Thanks.
Oh, okay, so let me quickly answer that. I don't think there's a problem about that. If you need to include someone else to co-author your work, it is still acceptable. We're dealing with the work really, more dealing with the work than the producers. So it's allowed. If you can still bring in someone else to join you to write this chapter up, it's fine.
Yes, and just an addition to that, you can only, if you would like to bring in a co-author, that's fine, only until the point you submit the first draft. After you submit the first draft, I'm sorry, we won't be able to have you add on any other person. So if you want, now that it's early stage and you want to bring somebody on, that fine, but please inform us. Thank you.
Any other question? All right, so let me invite Professor Ayo Yusuf. Oh, Professor Sorry, please make it snappy.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you for the good organization of the workshop. We are learning a lot, and I was just asking, do we have limitation in terms of how long, how many pages, and is each of these paper accepted going to be a stand-alone chapter, or they'll form a group? Because at one time I went off, I had a Senate meeting. Sorry for that. Thank you.
All right, so it's going to be a standalone chapter in a book. Is that a question?
Yes, that was one.
Yeah.
And then how long, how big, how many pages?
Okay, so maybe you were not available when Professor Tlawasin was presenting about this. We'll send you the presentation so that you can go through. The deadline for chapter submission is 4th of October, as you will see in the slides when we send them to you. So by 4th of October, you should be able to send in your chapter.
Maybe you didn't get my question. My question was,
Yes.
how many pages should the chapter be? Maybe 10 pages?
Okay. Don't worry. Everything is inside the slide. Everything is inside the slide. I think it's about 8,000 words. 8,000 words, including references. So don't worry, we'll send the link to you. If you have other questions, you can still ask by sending us emails, myself and Professor Taibat Lawansi. Is that fine?
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you very much, sir. All right, so Professor Ayo Yusuf.
Thank you very much. I have this job of greeting everyone, thanking everyone for attending this wonderful session. This project actually started last year with the workshop, and this workshop, after the workshop, we had the documentary, which is still online, which you can watch and could actually improve your focus on your chapter in the proposed book. Documentary is very rich. Also, an outcome is the little book on development, which I mentioned when I was doing review. All of these are there for us to consult to help us. I want to start by thanking the funders of this project, Africa Multiple Center of Excellence in African Studies, University of Bayreuth, Germany, and the Lagos African Cluster Center, which is the center of that Africa Multiple. The Lagos African Cluster Center is one of 4 of the centers of Africa Multiple in Africa. The other 3 are Moore University Kenya, Rhodes University South Africa, and Joseph Kizebo University, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. We have good funding from them to be able to reconfigure African studies, and this is what we are doing. That is why you can see that part of the things that I want to achieve with the book is about actually reconfiguring Africa in terms of development. What is development to an African? That's the major question we are trying to address here. What does development mean to my grandmother who's in the village? What's the concept of development? We need to interrogate all of this. Yes, I want to thank the principal investigators, Professor Taiba Lawansi and Dr. Abisoye Eleshi, for championing this. They have been doing wonderfully well. You still remember the Lagos ownership documentary, which is still online, can access it. It's one of their brain children, I would say. I want to thank those who made our workshop last year to be very wonderful. We had our own Professor Jimuna of Department of Philosophy, University of Lagos. We had Bishop Asan Kuka, Archbishop of Sokoto Diocese, Catholic Archdiocese of Sokoto. We had Professor Egosa Osage, the Director General, Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. All of these gentlemen were there to talk about development. And also my own supervisor, Professor Oluboyega Alaba, was there to, though retired, came to offer suggestions on what we mean by development. I would want to thank the reviewers today. I'm also one of them. Dr. Yakubu Moses, in no particular order. Dr. Kayode Suola, Dr. Akinmayo Akiotiko, Dr. Kazim Fayemi, Dr. Peter Oni, and Dr. Basirat Oyalo. Thank you very much for making our time, particularly those who have joined us from outside the country. We don't know what time it is there. Thank you for making time to join us. We will definitely get back to you. This is a book project that we really hope will talk to the issue that it is intended to speak to. Thank you all. We will still get across to you, like I said, and we will always also call on you sometimes when we need you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.